Joining us today is Professor Lucas Hasten, an anthropologist and professor at Las Positas College in Livermore, California, where he teaches courses in biology, religion, language, and gender and sexuality. Guess what? It's a very interesting time for education, and Professor Hasten has joined us to talk about what the kids are going through, but also, have we taken a look at the entire practice of teaching? Maybe we will. Professor Hasten, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I saw that you wrote that the entire practice of teaching is based on an ancient and outdated church model that reeks of classism and racism and functions via punitive measures, and of course is not appropriate in any way for teaching our kids today. Those are some wrong words, and I would like to hear all about this.
Yeah. So let me first frame this by saying that I teach community college in California. And so that's where my perspective is coming from. That's what I'm informed by. And as a college instructor, you walk on the field calling all the shots. All the shots. You lecture, you hold students accountable, you dictate assignments and homework, you set grades, you set standards. It's the furthest thing from a democracy that there could be. It's based in a very old-fashioned model that comes from the church, where it's very top-down. It's very authoritarian. It's very hierarchical. And my students actually walk into the classroom and they are prepared to listen to and believe absolutely everything that I say. It's very unusual for them to try to disagree openly. They're afraid to challenge my authority. They're afraid to ask questions. And it really is a terrible model for learning. It's a great model for memorizing, passages from the Bible, but it's not a terrific model for learning.
Talk about what an opposite and more progressive model for learning would look like.
Well, one of the things I've gotten really in touch with over my years as a community college instructor is the great diversity of learning styles. Not just that, but neurodiversity. Human beings are incredibly neurodiverse, and our system has always been geared towards those who are the most highly functioning according to the demands that we place on them at the time. So what we want to do is we want to communicate with every student in a way that suits them. We want to give every student an opportunity to learn and to demonstrate what they've learned in a way that suits them. And so sometimes that means there's not a time limit. Sometimes that means accepting early drafts and revised papers. Sometimes that means grading the same essay 3, 4, or 5 times, which is not easy to do when you teach community college as I do, and you have more than 200 students writing essays every week. So there's a lot of things going on. We have
200 students writing essays every week that you have to read, and then if they're going to do revisals, then they have to read again. How much of the sort of punitive system is because of the amount of resources we use to teach our children?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Judging from what I've just experienced with my colleagues, a lot of people have deadlines simply because if they don't, then things don't get submitted. Students will wait until the last minute. That's a problem for the instructor more than it is for the student. When I was a student, I very frequently waited until the last minute to do things. I think in my job, I wait until the last minute to do things sometimes.
No one knows what you're talking about. Everyone here starts 4 days in advance of the project's
exactly. So that's just, the reality is that people do wait until things absolutely need to get done to do them. But if you're an instructor and you have 200 essays to read every week, then you can't possibly do it all at the very last minute. So we set these deadlines to allow ourselves enough time to read these essays and to get them graded. One of the great problems you have is with students who wait the whole semester to do stuff, and then the last week comes and they want to submit everything. And that's really an untenable position for an instructor because you're just overwhelmed with the workload. So I do think that a lot of it is trying to find a practical balance between a reasonable balance of workload for the instructor and realistic expectations about how people actually do work in the real world.
There are colleges that don't give grades. How are you supposed to know if the person you're hiring from Reed is going to be able to, do the job if they don't have a grade attached to their name.
Well, the whole concept of grading, and I do give grades, it's part of my job. It's you're rendering a judgment based upon a set of criteria. It's possible to change the criteria and create something that's more like a portfolio, which is actually much more practical in the working world. So, for example, if you were looking for other work, you would present a portfolio of your work. They wouldn't much be interested in your college transcript. So if I were hiring, and I do hire, I'm much more interested in what instructors have done in the classroom with their students than I am in how they did in their graduate seminar.
Let's
So
see.
it's portfolio based is what I'm saying.
That's a good idea. But then, of course, that would not fit into our capitalistic model, because you got to hire someone, you got to hurry it up, just look at the grades and toss them into a job. It doesn't really seem like it's a very human or humanistic or
Well, we also have to
humane system that we live under.
we have to speak to the the institutionalized white privilege in the whole model as well, because college especially is set up for people of privilege to succeed. It's set up for people of privilege to access. And so if you're set up with privilege and access, then you're set up to succeed and to get better grades. If you have nothing to do but to go to school full time and you don't have to raise children or handle a job or take care of aging ill parents, then you can get those A's. That's pretty easy. And the only thing tearing at you in your college life is how to balance going to parties and studying, getting the job done.
It's rough.
Exactly. But there are a lot of
elite parties is one of the main things that you have to learn how to do if you're going to be part of the elite.
Well, yes, it is structured for people who are already set up to succeed. So giving grades to people is like saying, good on you for taking advantage of all the advantages you already had, in some ways.
Professor Hasten, community colleges, that is not necessarily their mission. They were not set up right for the wealthy and privileged. How talk about the intersection between what college was originally set up for and the mission of community college, and how those two things intersect and conflict.
Yes. Well, there is a very big difference, several big differences between university four-year institutions and two-year institutions like the school in which I teach. Four-year institutions are very much about conferring a degree and a rank and a status. And most Americans know this. That's why so many parents are so utterly concerned with which school their child goes to. But community college is something different. Community college has been there from the start for two purposes. The first is to prepare students for college who are not adequately prepared after completing high school. And you know what? That's a bad assumption too, because a lot of students come to community college purely for financial reasons. So it's not necessarily that they're not prepared. Sometimes the lack of preparation is economic. And so community college allows you another 2 years to boost your grades and maybe get some financial aid, some scholarships, things like that. And then the other mission of community college is to serve the community. And when I was growing up, the community colleges offered continuing adult education classes. They offered, you could go and take the same physical education course every semester just to get a workout at the gym for a low cost. There was a huge emphasis on the community college reaching out to and interacting with, involving the community. Although when times get tough economically, we tend to see that mission shrink quite a lot. And we start to pull back from offering those programs for the community and to focus instead on creating a degree transfer pipeline. And so in California, when I began teaching in about 2001, there was a great emphasis on serving the community. And then we had some severe budget shortfalls under W. Bush. And things got shrunk pretty significantly, and we lost all of that. We lost the ability for adults to come in from the community and take that dance class or that fencing class because they needed to be on a degree pathway. We lost the ability for students to repeat classes because they were enjoyable, like a theater class or a drama class, because they'd already taken it and it was time for them to move on to the next phase so they could move on to transferring to the next institution. And it just became a means to an end as opposed to an institution intended to serve the community.
Oh, that is sad. Can you talk about, things are very different now that we're living under COVID and COVID restriction. Can you talk about the differences between teaching kids face to face and teaching them online as you have been for at least the last year? Yes.
Yes, I have been teaching online full time since the middle of March 2020, like so many other teachers. And before that, I was a face to face instructor, which I enjoyed exceedingly. Being a face to face instructor is incredibly rewarding in an instant gratification kind of way. We all talk about that thing they call the aha moment, that moment when you see enlightenment spread across a student's face and they literally gasp and say, oh, it's such a rewarding thing. There's also that great stimulation of just being in the same room with someone and having an interesting conversation and engaging discourse. And a lot of that is gone now. And what's taken its place is work, to be honest with you, just a tremendous amount of work. And I personally would never have opted into teaching online because I knew it was a tremendous amount of work. As I mentioned a bit earlier with those 200 essays that get read every week and graded and commented upon, it's an incredible workload. And I think instructors like myself have been forced into a kind of reckoning with our own ethics around pedagogy. Because I just had to face the fact that my class is a lot tougher online and it requires a lot more work, a lot more individual responsibility. My students are also doing much better work than they ever have. And suddenly it's not up to me so much to teach them, drive things into their heads as it is up to them to learn.
That's interesting. I taught at Brooklyn College for a while.
That's my alma mater.
I taught in the media studies department, and I always wanted the students to really take on the work and learn themselves. But by the time they had come to me, which was after at least 12 years of, likely public education in the United States or in other countries, they had come in with this idea of like, I give you something, you chew it up, then you give it back to me, sort of. And that is not the way I wanted to teach. I really wanted to be like, this is the general learning playing field. You tell me what your interest is. You come up with, your line of interest. And they just they couldn't do it. No offense to the Brooklyn College kids. One or two, but I think it was because of how just it was pounded into them that this is what education is. And you go in and you get your grade so that you can come out and have your job.
Right. And I've seen a lot of, this idea that education has been following a corporate model now for quite a long time. And this applies to the students too, who see themselves as consumers. In some cases, they feel that they've paid for their grade. That you see this in the news sometimes, the idea that, well, I paid that money for that tuition, and so that should get me a degree. Students sometimes feel if I show up, if I do the homework, then I should get an A, even though they didn't do the homework well or they didn't show up regularly.
I went to graduate school, and I feel like they gave everybody an A because you didn't have to be there. And, I was like, this is not A work. Even
where did you go to graduate school?
When I did my lesser, some of the papers that I did that were not at the top of my game because whatever I had going on, still got an A. And I'm like, well, I'm either a genius or they're just giving out A's.
Have you ever seen the show Chopped?
No.
Okay, this is a cooking contest. And the reason I mention it is because sometimes you win because nobody else was good. Grading is what I mean to say is grading is a relative exercise.
But I talk to the other students too, and I'm like, oh, you got an A? And then sometimes I'm
Oh,
like, but you're definitely not intelligent. So you got it. So everybody, it was like Oprah, you get an A, and you get an A. And if you're paying thousands of
yeah.
dollars, we don't want you to leave. Yeah, I don't know. It's questionable.
Yeah, I suppose there is an assumption in certain graduate programs that if you've made it into the program, there are really only two grades, A and F.
Yeah, A and F, right.
Essentially, it's kind of an insult to get anything less than an A in a graduate program. It's not true across the board, but that was definitely my experience too. I know. Let me say something positive about graduate programs, because they're wonderful. Graduate programs are where you learn to be critical, to think about what you've been taught. My experience as an undergraduate was, here's a list of things that you should know, and from now on, take for granted. And then when I got to graduate school, they told me to look at that list and question everything and doubt everything. And to be honest with you, graduate school is really where I learned to think. And I have Columbia University to thank for that. But it really was about thinking critically and questioning these things that we've come to take for granted, like the way that education works, like the expectations that we put on this idea of pedagogy as being punitive almost. I've had some disagreements with my colleagues about grading. If a student submits a paper late, should you mark them down? You can probably get into a bar fight over that with another instructor. Because there are many people who say, well, training people to be on time is part of what we're supposed to do here. We're supposed to be manufacturing good workers. And I disagree. I don't think that my job as an educator is to manufacture a good worker. I think it's to teach someone to think and to feel confident that they know how to think.
It certainly, doesn't account for an unleveled playing field, right? So especially in community colleges, and even people going to public high school who are all distance learning at this point, some people have a quiet space to learn with a computer, and some people have 3 younger siblings and they're in the living room and they're trying to, pay attention to ancient history if they're lucky enough to have humanities still. And it just doesn't take into account the playing field being unleveled. So
right,
I mean,
the
not
inequity.
get something in on time. I get a lot of students being like, my mom has cancer, I'm sorry this is late. And they hope that the professor themselves will have compassion for not marking down. I don't want to give away my secret, but I put in a syllabus, you will be marked down, because I want them to get it in on time so I can grade it. And then I just grade what they earned,
That's empathy. And I think that's what we should all be doing. And you're right, there's tremendous inequity in online education too. Because, well, firstly, you have to be a good reader in order to take a course online. And that's not everyone. I myself prefer to read a book, something in my hand. I find that much easier than scrolling through text online. So you have to be able to comprehend and text and synthesize ideas together. These are high-level skills that ordinarily we could talk you through in a classroom. But you're at home, you're trying to find a quiet space and a way to focus and weed through all of this text. It's incredibly challenging. It's set up for the most highly functioning people, honestly. And so that's why we have to be mindful of the inequity and make sure that we have opportunities for everyone to show us what they know. So I have an assignment that I give to my students, for example, where I tell them, you can do a final presentation, make a video, make a podcast, make a website. It doesn't have to be a paper. I want you to tell me what you learned, however you can tell me. And those things are important. It makes grading more complicated. It takes more time, but it's one way of trying to even out those inequities.
That's so interesting and so creative. Oh, you're allowing for the creative process, Professor.
Trying.
Do you see any opportunities for the betterment of our educational system in general coming out of the, crisis that we were thrown into by the pandemic?
Yes, I think all educators hope that certain things will be changed now forever. One thing that I hope to see is a reduction in class size. We talk about that in primary school education all the time because there's a recognition that young children need one-on-one attention from their teachers. There are still too many young children in classrooms together. I have had friends who teach grammar school, and they've got 25 children in the class, and fully a third of them are on IEPs because they learn differently or they have different challenges. And that's just too much for one teacher to handle in a classroom. Students need to be worked with individually, at their pace, at their level, with the materials that suit them and the styles that suit them. And that's fundamentally impossible when you put one teacher in a classroom with 25 children. It does not allow for neurodiversity at all. There's no way to level out the inequity. So I hope that everywhere class sizes will diminish, from grammar school all the way up through colleges, where you see lecture halls with 500 students. That's not teaching, that's lecturing. And to me, there's a very big difference. So yeah, if for myself, I have had classes with 50 and 60 students in them, which is large enough. And I hope that that will never happen again, because I need to be able to speak to everyone individually in the way that works best for them. Not to forget the fact that it may not ever be conscionable to put that many people in a small space together again. I'm not really sure. We had a pretty small classroom. We had 50 students in there. They were literally touching elbows. I don't know how safe that will be. So I hope that that will maybe change. The other thing I can say for myself and my colleagues is we hope that many of these meetings that could have been emails will keep being emails.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah, we do. And we hope that our meetings, that our collegiate governance meetings, will continue to be done virtually online, because we get better attendance and better engagement when they are.
Professor, thank you for joining us. We've been speaking with Professor Lucas Hasten, anthropologist and professor at Las Positas College in Livermore, California, where you teach courses in biology, religion, language, and gender and sexuality. I appreciate you being on our program so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're watching ACT TV. Stay with us.